What's up guys, and welcome back to another Scratch tutorial. In this video I will be showing you how to build a easy side-scrolling platformer shooter. I will be splitting this tutorial into two parts, and in this video we will be getting our art assets and coding our player and projectiles. Let's get started. So the first thing I want you to do is to go to the Scratch website and search up my alt account, which is XAMUIL3, and click on his profile, and you should see a new project shared called Platformer Shooter Assets. If you click on see inside, you should see that all the art I have used for the demo project is inside. So we have these different character animations and the hitboxes, we have the enemies, the ground sprite, the player projectiles, and what you can do from now on is actually go ahead and remix this project. Or if you don't want that annoying remix tab underneath your new project, you can simply drag each sprite into your backpack. And once you've dragged them all inside your backpack, you can go ahead and open a new project and re-upload the sprites onto your project. So that's what I'm doing right now. So I've gone to my projects, I've opened this empty project I've created a while ago, and I'm simply going to open my backpack, and I'm just going to drag and drop the sprites that I have put inside. So if you watch carefully, I just click on it and drag it into the sprite upload place, and boom, there it is. Now we're just gonna do the same thing for each sprite, and once I make the background black, we should be all set for coding. By the way, the art I have used is not actually by me. I have simply gone online to itch.io and I found some cool assets that actually inspired me to make this platformer shooter. So, the original creator doesn't actually say you have to give credit, but it would really be great if you did, because it is their work, and you know, it's just important that people get recognition for what they do. Anyway, let's get coding. Go ahead and drag in a when green flag click block, and we're gonna broadcast a message called start. Now, before we go ahead, I'm just going to make two new blocks called setup and player move. Now, this is going to be following the programming structure that I've been using in the recent tutorials I have been making, and it's just really helpful because it helps the project run more clearer and it's easier for you to control it. So, make sure that when you're making player move, that it is running without screen refresh, because we will be doing some collision checking with that, but setup does not have to be. Now we're going to drag in our setup block right inside our forever loop, and we're going to say repeat until player move. Now we're going to make a bunch of variables in preparation for our player and as well as the scrolling movement. So go ahead and make two new variables called x and y, both for the sprite only. These will be for our player, and go ahead and make two new variables called x velocity for the sprite only, and y velocity, also for the sprite only. So these are gonna kind of help our player jump and move sideways and stuff. Finally, make two new variables for all sprites called scroll x and scroll y. And these variables will be how our magic happens when we get to start side scrolling and moving around. Underneath our setup block, we're going to set all these variables to 0. Now let's start coding our player movement. The first thing we're going to do is to drag in a switch costume to hitbox, because we have to use this rectangle for our collision detection, not our costumes, which have like weird pixel edges. So we're going to do horizontal movement first, which will be if our key right arrow is pressed. Then we're going to change our x velocity by say 3. And we're also going to point in direction 90. So when we do actually render our costumes, you can kind of see the player flipping back and forth. As you can see, I'm doing the opposite if key left arrow is pressed, so we're going to change our x velocity by -3 and also point in direction -90. Now let's throw in some friction for the player, so this is what we're going to do. We are going to set our x velocity to x velocity multiplied by 0.7. Then we are going to change our player x variable by our x velocity. So now the player position is actually being recorded in these variables. And the final thing we have to do is actually make the player go to their variable x and variable y positions. So we're going to make a new block called position, click on OK. And underneath this block, I'm gonna say go to x, our variable x minus scroll x, and y, our variable y minus scroll y. Now, this should be a familiar sight for you if you've done any scrolling games before, or if you have watched Griffpatch's scrolling platformer tutorials, which I personally have when I started learning Scratch, and I found them to be really helpful. So, make sure you get this right, and we're simply gonna drag in position underneath player move. So now if we run the project, we can see we are now able to move horizontally with friction, yay! Now we can move left and right. The only thing we have to do now is to add in our gravity. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to change our y velocity by -2 every loop. And we're going to change our y variable by our y velocity. So basically the same technique we used for x velocity. However, we have one extra thing to note, and that's because we have to collide with the ground. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to put a position block right underneath that, and we're going to drag in a repeat loop. Inside this repeat until loop, we're going to say repeat until not touching our level. So make sure, by the way, when you're doing this, make sure player move is running without screen refresh, alright? Otherwise the script will not work. Repeat until not touching ground. We're going to change our y by 1, so we escape from the ground. We are going to set our y velocity to 0, and finally we are going to reposition ourselves so our position updates as this collision check is repeating. So let's test this out now, and if I click on the green flag, we should be colliding with the level, and yes we are. I know it is not very exaggerated here, so I'm just going to make our y position to 50 when we restart the project, and yes, we are perfectly colliding with the ground and we can still move sideways. So now the next step for us would be to actually move the camera, so it's not just that the player is moving, but the ground is as well. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to change our scroll x by round x minus scroll x. This is a similar algorithm I have used in other of my tutorials, and basically this helps add in some smooth camera movement. So we're going to say x minus scroll x divided by 3. So if you click on the project right now and you attempt to move sideways, you'll notice that our player looks like he's kind of being stuck to an anchor as we're moving left and right. And don't worry, this is perfectly normal because we have not positioned our ground yet. And that kind of makes this illusion to think that you've done something wrong. Well, you have not, alright? The next thing we're going to do is to simply drag in our position block into our ground sprite. So if you just see what I'm doing here, you can see now this position block is inside our ground sprite, and we're going to broadcast a new message called tick. So basically each time this loop runs, it's going to broadcast 1 tick. So inside our ground sprite, we're going to say when I receive tick, position. And that's going to help us move the player and the ground, and we can get this cool scrolling motion. So now let's test this out, and yes, we are able to move our player along with the ground. Now that is really awesome, but now another problem comes up, and is that the ground has an edge, and if I go off it, we're gonna fall down. So what we're gonna do is that we're going to limit our camera movement as well as our player X, so we don't fall off the edge, or the camera shows the edge of the ground. Let us limit our player X first. So go ahead and drag in an if block, and we're going to say if the absolute value of our X is greater than 700. Now these are all like pre-calculated numbers because I did some testing with the sprites, so they should work. So if our absolute value of X is greater than 700, we are going to set our X to absolute value of X divided by X. Now if you're wondering what this does, this basically returns whether we are positive or negative in terms of our X position, and we're going to multiply this by 700. So it's either going to be -1 or 1 multiplied by 700, and that's going to help us limit our player X to either -700 or 700. So if we test this out right now, we should not be able to fall off the edge. And yep, our player is not able to fall off the edges anymore. So that's great, we've got our player X limited now. The only thing we have to do now is also to limit our scroll X variable, and we can simply duplicate our script from before, and we're just going to replace our variables from X to scroll X instead. And we're also going to change our number that we're limiting to into 480. So let's test this out right now by popping it right underneath our player move, and let's see if our camera limits itself. Yes, it does. Now we are unable to see the edges of the ground, and that is a great improvement. Right, enough about camera movement. I think it's time for something more exciting, and that would be animations for our character. So when we're running around, we should be having this run cycle loop, and if we're idle, we kind of just stay by ourselves. Maybe we'll add in a jump animation next episode, because we will not be covering jumping in this tutorial. So anyway, go ahead and make your new costumes block. Let's pop it right after player move. And underneath here, we're just going to start off simply by adding a switch costume to idle. So if we test this out right now, we can see we now have our yellow alien guy who's moving across the screen, and he's pointing towards left and right when we're moving left and right. So that is a good place to start. But now let's actually add in our running animation. So when our player is moving, he should be doing this little running loop. So if you go into the costumes tab, I've actually prepared some animations. So if you look at the code I'm doing right now, I've added in an if-else loop with this condition that if the absolute value of our x velocity is greater than 1, now this is going to check if we are actually running, right? So if our x velocity is greater than 1 or less than 1, because remember we have our absolute value condition there, then we are going to switch our costume into our running pose, which happens to be costumes 3, 4, and 5. And 6. So we had to find a way to make our player alternate between 3, 4, 5, 6, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to make a new variable called tick for the sprites only. Now this variable is going to be crucial to our project because not only will it help us animate our player, but we will also use it to do enemy cloning in the next episode as well. So we're going to change our tick by 1 right underneath player move, and because we now have this variable that's increasing every loop, we can now use some modular arithmetic to help assist us. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to say switch costume to 3 plus something. And that something is going to be tick or floor of tick, because later we're actually going to divide tick by a number so it isn't increasing as fast. And we're going to mod our tick by 4. Now if you're wondering why, it's because our run cycle has 4 frames, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when we use the mod operator, it's going to return 0, 1, 2, or 3. Depending on the remainder of tick divided by 4. In this case, I've actually divided our tick variable by 4 so that our run cycle goes a bit more slowly and it looks more realistic. And I think that is a huge improvement from just like this little green alien flipping from both sides. Now, this modular arithmetic approach to player animation is really one of my favorites because it really does elevate your game to the next level, and I will make a separate tutorial on player animation very soon. But back to our current stage, we actually have to be able to shoot our player projectiles now, and we're just going to make a new variable called reload for the sprite only to make that happen. We are going to change our reload by -1 every time this loop runs, and we're going to stick that kind of in between our Y collision and our camera movement. And right underneath that, we are going to add in our condition for shooting, which would be if key space pressed. Now obviously this is not enough by itself, because then if we hold down the space key, then we would just be able to like rat-tat-tat-tat shoot like bullets at an infinite speed. So we have to implement our reload variable. So we're going to say this: we can only shoot if our reload variable is less than 1. And because our reload variable is decreasing by 1 every time this loop runs, we will actually set our reload to a bigger number when we do actually shoot. So I'm going to create a clone of player projectile, and we're going to set reload to 15, meaning that after we shoot, we'll have to wait for this loop to repeat itself 15 more times before reload is less than 1 and we get to shoot again. Now, hopping into our player projectile sprite, we are going to say when I start as a clone, we are going to show ourselves, and we're also going to switch our costume to 1, which I believe is one of the bullet costumes. We're also going to hide our player projectile original sprite so it doesn't show as the project is running. Now go ahead and drag in our position block into our player projectile sprite as well, and we're going to say when I receive tick, position. If we test this out right now, our shooting should almost work, so let's press space right there, and you can see, there we go, we have this little projectile that just popped up there. and its positions or its coordinates are actually 0, 0 because the x and y variables are 0, 0. And that means we actually have to set our x and y variables for that clone into the position of our player when it is cloned. And we're going to do that by saying set x to the x variable of player, make sure you do not select x position. And we're also going to set our y to the y position of our player. Oh, I meant the y variable, sorry. Do not listen to me, okay? Select the y variable. We're also going to point in the direction of player, so that, if we're shooting towards the left, then the bullet kind of flips itself towards that direction. And finally, I popped in a position block in there for good measure. So if we test our project right now and we start pressing space, we should see the bullets are now following our player's position, which is really, really nice. Because now all we gotta do is to actually make the bullets move in their direction and delete themselves when they reach the edge. And that's gonna be surprisingly simple. We are going to change our x by our direction divided by a value. I'm gonna go with 10 this time. And that's going to help us a lot because now if you press it, then whatever direction the bullet is pointing towards, it will move towards that. And that's like just a really simple way of making bullets move. We now only have one problem, which is actually to make the bullets hide or disappear and eventually delete themselves off screen. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to use a method popularized by Griffpatch. So go ahead and edit our position block, and we're going to add in two new inputs called x and y. Now, this is not going to change our position block. We're simply going to go and say, go to x, x, and y, y. And inside here, we're going to say, if our x equals to our actual x position, and our y equals to our actual y position, then we're going to show ourselves. If not, hide. And this only works because Scratch actually does not allow sprites to go off screen. If you don't do any extra code hacks and stuff. So this will actually help us detect if the position the sprite is supposed to reach is not being reached because of Scratch's limitation. So if we pop in our x minus scroll x variables and the y minus scroll y variables inside these parameters, everything should work perfectly, but our bullets now hide and also delete themselves when they reach the edge, which is really, really nice. Finally, let's add in some animation for our bullets as well, because in fact this project also includes animation for the bullets, specifically frames 1 to 3. So go ahead and we're going to drag in our really cool mod costume animation block from our player sprite, and as you can see, we're going to be alternating this time between costumes 1, 2, and 3. And because there are only 3 frames, we're going to change our mod value into 3. And if we try it right now, let's actually divide tick by a smaller value so it increases faster. We can see that our bullets now have this cool trailing effect behind them, so it makes them look like they're on fire, which is, again, brings another level of depth into our scrolling shooter. Now, there is one final tweak I would like to make for the mechanics of our player, and that is I don't want the player to move when it is shooting, because we actually also have a shooting frame where the player looks really cool and he's kind of holding a pistol or something. So we kind of want to stop the player when we shoot. So first things first, we're going to make our costume switch into our shoot pose when our key space is pressed. So if you see right now, yes, we can change into this shoot costume. The second thing we gotta do is actually to fix our player X position when we're shooting, so we would stop any horizontal movement. And the way we do that is that we can add in an extra if condition saying only if not key space is pressed. Then we can move like left and right. So if not key space is pressed, we are going to chuck it right over our if key right arrow and if key left arrow pressed conditions. So let me just put it right over them. And yep, that should be good enough. So if we try to shoot right now, boom, we stay in that awesome cool pose and we get a rapid fire, well, not really rapid fire, these fireball bullet projectile stuff. So yeah, I think that brings a wrap to today's tutorial. I think we've achieved quite a lot. We've been able to get some nice camera movement, we've been able to have some reloading action from our player and shoot these flaming fireballs. And in the next tutorial, we will aim to try and add in some different enemies that will come and attack us all with HP, so we'll also add in like some projectile and enemy collision, and we'll see where that takes us. Again, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the tutorial, and I will see you very, very soon. Cheers.